Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH1502 Introduction to Community Media. This week I'm going to run through what the topics will be covered in the 7th lecture, which is entitled Decline, the Decline of Community. And we touched on this last week, and I just want to kind of go into it in a little bit more detail, because I think it's often, if you like, a good way to think about what something is by thinking about its absence. So if people don't feel that they have a sense of community, so what does that imply? So what's missing? So our job, if you like, is to trace some of the social arrangements and the social practices and the behaviours and the expectations, if you like, that explain what is missing and what we think we might reconstruct as a new form of community, a new sense of community in the future. So what we'll do is we'll look at some different ideas. The notes for this are up on the wiki already, wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk. Just follow the link for TECH1502 and they're in the lecture notes section. So it's things, what we'll look at is kind of identity crisis is a big issue at the moment. It's almost as if we're wandering around. I mean, I think social media kind of has this effect with people, is that we're kind of wandering around going, what's happening? What's going on? Who are we? Where do we belong? These are really useful, vital questions. So it's how do we kind of organise our thinking about this in terms of the social links that we have, the kind of sense of identity we have. So what does it mean to be English, British, Welsh, Scottish, Irish, Northern Irish? What are these things in relative terms to each other? European is a big issue as well. And at what point do we make sense of who we are and what our identity is in relation to other people? So the diversity of contemporary society, or the I was going to use the word monotony, that's the wrong word, but it's the kind of mono identity, the single identity, uniform, homogenized identity. Is that as much of a problem as the multicultural identity, which is played out in some of our cities and our urban areas? To some, it's disruptive. The transition from a monocultural view to a multicultural view can be difficult for people to handle. So what are the kind of common values that we can look to, that we can talk about and point to, which kind of give us a sense that we can address the loss of community, and that we can put something in its place which works as effectively, if not better? That's what should be our aim. So we'll look at the idea of kind of diversity in relation to the sense of thick communities or the sense of thin communities. We'll look at the idea of kind of how people cope and adapt to the sense of change. But this isn't just about people, it's also the way that we plan our environment, our built environment, our urban environment, and things like the use of cars, the atomization that comes and the individualization that comes with, kind of the focus on car ownership as the predominant means of transport, and certainly in a place like Leicester, of kind of how we get about. So we'll return to looking at some of the ideas that Robert Putnam puts forward in the Bowling Alone book, which we mentioned last week, and the sense of the how post-industrialisation or deindustrialisation really impacted on people's, and had a major impact on people's sense of community and sense of identity, that they no longer belonged to miners, steel workers, dockers, car manufacturers, that sense of identity was lost, and it wasn't replaced, and it was kind of was kind of upset, and kind of we're still dealing with the consequences of that. So the kind of transformation that took place and the social breakdown that accompanied it, so the kind of rising poverty, and the kind of way that social mobility has gone into reverse. So you're less likely now, if you come from a working class background, family background, to achieve a high status social position than you would have been 20 or 30 years ago, because the inequalities in our society are much more apparent and much more stretched. So in those circumstances, how do we come to have a shared identity, a shared sense of belonging, a shared sense of ownership? How can we rally around mutual benefits to our social identity? Is it just the case that we should always blame somebody else for our problems, the scroungers, the outsiders, the new arrivals? Is it too easy to kind of put up an argument that says that it's all somebody else's fault, and we don't really look at and interrogate the things that we're responsible for ourselves, our selfishness, if you like, our limited worldview, our it's all right, Jack, kind of as long as I'm okay mentality. We don't look and consider what other people can contribute and how we can encourage other people to play a part in a socially sustainable kind of way. So we'll look at the return to the notion of social capital, which we raised last week as well, and think about the idea of how social capital works in different situations. It's not a perfect tool for a metaphor for thinking about social arrangements, but it's a useful one to start with. And really what we're kind of trying to raise the question of is, how do we encourage participation in our civic life, our social life? And this might be a good question to think about in terms of the community reporting that you're going to be doing and developing, is, what is it that you see and understand and feel it would be a good thing to challenge and develop about our contemporary social environment that you think needs to be talked about, that isn't being talked about? What are the social issues that don't get addressed more broadly, and that people don't have a voice for and people aren't heard about? That's really the role of community media. So we want to look at this in the way that kind of says that, are people just being patronised, patted on the head? Oh, they're there, it's kind of, isn't that awful kind of thing, which is I think a tendency for mainstream media to do, and good local bureaucracies and government organisations they tend to take this approach. Whereas what is real empowerment? Where will real change come from in terms of grassroots participation, ownership, challenge to the kind of existing way that we do things? So we need to have an understanding of what participation is in order to ask people to participate. So there's a bit of work we can do around that. So as I say, the notes are up online. We'll have a good discussion about this as well. If you want to come along to one of the podcast recordings we're doing for the Doc Media Month, that's great as well. Look on talk.our.dmu.ac.uk for the details. It'd be great to see some of you coming along and taking part in the discussion and the debate, or just helping out and seeing how a podcast is run. Okay, see you at the lecture.